Our scripture reading for today is found in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jericho to Jerusalem, when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have incurred.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell in the hands of the robbers?" The expert of the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go forth and do likewise." This is the word of the Lord. Please be seated.
Thank you, JC. All right. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hope Church. My name is Drew, one of the pastors here. We're delighted that you've joined us today. You know, as Jeff mentioned, there's so much happening around the world, especially with the events of yesterday and the current events in the Middle East. And our hearts go out in grief and in prayer for peace in many different ways. And one of the things about the Christian story that many people might have off or different is just what is the Christian message really about, especially in times that deal with life and death and real situations. And so we've actually been in this sermon series because we happen to be in this part in the church calendar called Lent, which is this season in which we're reflecting on Jesus' journey to the cross and to resurrection. Now, what we believe as Christians is that Jesus was actually a real person who really lived, really died, and non-Christian historians even would often talk about the reality of this person named Jesus. Now, of course, even those non-Christian historians like the Jewish historian Josephus, he would write about how Jesus was a miracle worker and how he started this great movement. But even during the ancient times, people were still wrestling with who was this Jesus person. Now, one of the great things about this message series that we find ourselves in is really we get to look at these eyewitness accounts of what did Jesus really say and teach, and what did he actually embody in the way that he lived his life. And so our sermon series during this Lenten series is actually called Step by Step. We're looking at Jesus' journey to the cross. And what does that look like, and what does he teach? So if you're someone who's maybe you're exploring faith, or maybe you've been a Christian for a while, and perhaps you've been disturbed by so many things that are happening around the world, or even in our city, or even in your personal life, today we actually get to look at this passage that perhaps many of you have heard, or even the idea of the Good Samaritan. You've heard that phrase before, which again, you can see the underpinnings of how these stories of Jesus, as well as these teachings of Jesus, really echo throughout even current civilization. But what does the original source have to say about this? Now, let's look at the passage. Look at what Jesus, the context in which this passage was brought to us, as JC read for us. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law, in other words, someone who was well-versed in the Torah and the teachings, the Judeo kind of law, as well as in the Hebrew scriptures, and he's an expert in the law. And he stood up to test Jesus, and he says, "Teacher," he asked. Now, you got to remember, during this time, Jesus' reputation, he's this carpenter who's full of incredible wisdom and learnedness, and he's also someone who's dripping with this power to heal and even to resurrect the dead. And so, again, this is the historical Jesus that we're talking about. And so even the religious people were so shocked at who is this person, and where is he from, and what is he trying to do? What is he trying to accomplish? And so you can imagine the people who are the experts in the law, they're equivalent to like Jeff Trong, our location pastor here, as well as myself, like people who maybe we've got advanced degrees in theology in the Bible. And here they're confronting Jesus because they're so curious about who he is, but they're also antagonistic because in many ways, Jesus is upending even the way that the religious establishment treats other people and understands God and the way that God comes in the world. Now, notice what happens. So they asked him, "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, notice how Jesus responds. He says, "What is written in the law?" He replied. "How do you read it?" Now, notice what Jesus does here. He listens to his question, then he just asks another question. And notice how this expert responds. He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind." In other words, love God with everything that you have, every aspect of your being, your physical life, your emotional life, your spiritual life, every single part of who you are. Now, this idea, which is called the Great Commandment, it shows up in the different synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and here it shows up again. And here, in this context, the teacher of the law is basically saying this. And notice what he says, "And love your neighbor as yourself." Now, do you catch that? Basically, there's this integrated way of thinking about what is the greatest commandment, and it's basically this integrated way of it's loving God, it's having this right relationship with God, but also having this right relationship with other people. And notice what Jesus responds. He says, "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." Now, notice, like I mentioned, this kind of the great commandment, which is talked about, it comes up in the different synoptic gospels, talking about what is the sum of religion, what is the sum of faith. Now, in popular caricatures in the world today, especially in the United States, perhaps, there might be caricatures. Oh yeah, religious people, what they're hungry for is power, or theological astuteness, or somehow being able to be people of influence that can move nation states. And notice what's so interesting is that if you were to ask a commoner perhaps who maybe isn't aware or isn't part of like a faith community, like, hey, what is the essence of Christian faith or the Judeo-Christian faith? Many people might have all these other rumors about religion and what it might be about. And here, what's talked about, and it's talked about time and time again, and Jesus would talk about how the central heart of what the Christian faith is all about is actually love. Love. And when he sees this, and this expert of the law, when this expert of the law is actually able to also recite what it's about, what the entire kind of approach to God and who God is, what it's all about. It's about loving God, and it's about loving others. Now, that is different. One recent kind of survey, when asked about what is the reputation of Christians in the world, the top thing was judgmental. The second thing was hypocritical. And yet here, we see time and time again, and again, if you're new to faith, I just want you to know, if love is not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the Christian faith, I want to say I'm sorry. And here it is in the original source, and it comes up time and time again in the person of Jesus. That at the end of the day, what sums up what is the religious life, what is the life that is Godward in its orientation, it's centered around having a love relationship with God and with other people. Now, what this means is, and this is a fully integrated kind of life. Notice it's both of these things. It's having a love relationship with God and having a love relationship with your neighbor as yourself. Now, here's the thing, and I say this as a religious professional. I can't believe I called myself that, but there it is, a religious professional. It is so easy to actually divorce these things from each other, a love for God and a love for neighbor. I know that in my own personal journey, it is so easy to pore over these religious texts and read over the different nuances of Greek and Hebrew and church history and geek out about all these things. And to work so hard on preparing sermons that will hopefully move hearts. But when it comes down to just like being able to listen to my 10-year-old and hear about her day for 5 minutes, it's like the task of loving our 10-year-old and trying to be a present father. I can easily see that as like a distraction from work when, what if that actually is the work? Now, do you see, like the Great Commandment, what it does is it fuses both of these things, that a loving relationship with God and the way that we relate to each other is actually fully, wholly integrated. There's no way in which there's a hierarchy of what is more important than the other. I remember during COVID time, I work with an organization called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, which I talk about regularly. We talked about the course, which is going to be offered. It's a discipleship course that talks about this full integration of life, that when it comes down to the spiritual life, it's not only about how do we kind of cultivate a deep life of prayer, but also how do we live this out in healthy relationships. So you can imagine then, right, especially when COVID hit, there were so many people that were reaching out to us in our organization to help them, because they're like, gosh, you guys are talking about what's fundamentally needed during COVID time, which is basically, how do I stay emotionally whole and healthy in my relationships as I go about doing leadership in various different industries as well as in church settings. So a number of different pastors and churches and leaders, even in the city, were reaching out to us about how can we help them. So I remember I had agreed to do a Zoom call with a group of pastors across the nation from this one denomination, and there were about 100 pastors that were going to be on this hour-long call, and I was leading this kind of seminar on Zoom around emotionally healthy discipleship and emotionally healthy leadership. How do we stay in the midst of incredible crisis? How do we stay emotionally whole and vibrant and healthy in our relationships? So the call was supposed to be at like 1 o'clock Eastern time. And so I was like getting prepped for it and ready. And so at the time, though, we had 2 young kids at home. And my wife, I had told her, hey, I've got this call at 1 o'clock that's happening. So just, like, I need you here. Can you just be here at the very latest by 12:30 p.m.? Because at 12:30 p.m., like, I just need some time to center, get ready, to give my best to these 100 or so pastors online. So 12:30 hits, right? And she's still not there. And I'm trying to I feed the kids, right? And they're kind of in the other, but I'm like trying to figure out, like, I've got the whole laptop set up on Zoom, like on top of our bed in the bedroom. Like, I'm getting ready for this, trying to set up the background, the lighting and everything. And then meanwhile, I go out to the living room, which is kind of small, and I'm basically just trying to make sure kids are fed. Hey, don't worry, mom's coming soon. 12:45, she's still not there. So I'm like texting her, calling her, no response. And so now it's 12:50, 12:52, 12:53. At this point, like the kids, I turned on Bluey, and listen, I was just like, listen, you guys, you gotta raise yourself here, all right? I may lock this door, like just figure this out. So I'm super anxious about what's happening, and now I'm not even anxious, guys. At this point, I am mad. I'm like, why are you not answering your phone? I told you about this. We had agreed upon expectations, which is one of the skills in the Emotionally Healthy Relationships course. This is a conscious, realistic, spoken, agreed upon. At this point, like, I'm like so angry. And I'm like, where are you? I've left multiple messages. At this point, like 12:54, I call her one last time to leave like one last message. I can't believe this. Listen, when you walk in, the kids are going to be watching something, and I only let them do it because you weren't here, right? So like I'm doing this, and then she walks in probably around 12:55 or so. And so you can imagine, like, she walks in, and one of the things that we teach in our Emotionally Healthy Relationships course is, instead of jumping to conclusions and judging people predeterminedly, actually just asking, instead of using the word like, where were you? What's your problem? I can't believe you did this. How selfish are you right now? Like, instead we say, I'm puzzled. Honey, I'm puzzled where you were, So listen, I helped author this course. Like, I'm like, but she walks in at 12:55. And listen, I'm no longer puzzled. I am angry. So she walks in. I'm like, where were you? I told you, I've got to call in 5 minutes. And she's just like, oh, like, listen, sorry, the subways were all this and that. And she's like, I didn't have cell service because of this and that. And I'm like, just, I don't care. I can't believe you did this. How could you be so selfish? I can't, do you know how important this call is? I'm trying to encourage 100 pastors here and how to be emotionally healthy and have great relationships with their families. How could you be so selfish? So I'm upset, I'm furious. Meanwhile, the kids, they don't know. They're just watching their show or whatever, And I'm like, I cannot believe it. Now it's like 12:58. I'm like, you need to think about what you're doing here. I can't believe it. And then I'm like, I need to go lead this thing. So I go into the bedroom, I lock the door, and I sit down, and it clicks on at 1. And I enter the Zoom room, and I'm like, and the person's like, oh, we're so grateful to have Drew from Emotional Healthy Discipleship joining us. Drew, you want to just I'm like, hey, everyone. It's just, gosh, these are some difficult times, but what a privilege it is to be here with you today. Listen, what I wanted to talk about was really how do we remain emotionally whole during this season and just have great relationships. So let me show you some of my slides that I'd love to. So I basically just within a minute, I transferred into this other person who, and then some people are like, later during the Q&A, people are asking, they're like, so what do you do when your family, you got young kids, we're all kind of been in lockdown and all this. I'm like, yeah, it's one of the most difficult things. But let me share with you how these practices of silence, finally, in the Q&A, I was ransackled with guilt. And at my own kind of division of my personhood, my integrity, my personal integrity was seared, my conscience. And so finally by the end, I'm like, hey guys, just so you know, listen, I got into it with my wife right beforehand because she was late. And I'm like, listen, we're just trying to survive here. In fact, I need to go apologize to her. So, right after I end this call, I'm going to go apologize to her. But it was just this moment of oh my goodness. It is so easy to speak for God without living for God. So easy to encourage other people to love God and love other people, and yet be someone who lives out a different kind of spirituality and integrity myself. I mean, isn't it true, especially maybe if you came here with someone or your family, and somehow, Sunday mornings become the most ripe times to get into conflict, For those of you who may have missed it, the Christian life and the spiritual life is actually a fully integrated one, where loving God and loving your neighbor is actually deeply intertwined. Which is why when we talk about emotional healthy spirituality or discipleship, we're talking about a fully integrated life. We're not just saying, hey, here's some practices that will help you pray a little bit more or have some silence or you're reading scripture. What good is it if I'm someone who's good at teaching the scriptures, but I'm incredibly harsh with my spouse? Do you see how this works? It's a fully integrated discipleship. And so when Jesus basically responds and he says, you've answered well, go and do likewise. He's saying you've captured an essence of real spirituality that most people miss, especially religious professionals like Jeff and like myself. But notice what happens, because remember, even though this teacher of the law is able to answer this correctly, that's not really the reason why he's asking the question. Look at what it says. He wanted to justify himself. This is the expert in the law. And he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And he asked this question because, again, he's doing this to test Jesus. He's got these ulterior motives. And notice what Jesus says. Now, we're going to enter into, as Jesus replies here, again, even the phrase Good Samaritan is a phrase that people with no religious background are familiar with. Well, here's the original source as Jesus begins. Here's where even the phrase Good Samaritan comes from. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. Now, Jesus is teaching this, and this is a common trail that many people would have been aware of from Jerusalem to Jericho. They know that it's fraught with all sorts of potential dangers and attackers and things like that. And notice what it says. And he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest. Now, this priest, who is a religious professional, most likely very similar to this teacher of the law, happened to be going down the same road. And notice what happens when he saw the man. Now you got to understand, as Jesus is teaching this, he's teaching this to a people very familiar with this road and probably very familiar with a situation like this. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, Jesus continues, a Levite. Now, what is a Levite? Now, all priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. Levites were part of the clan where the priestly clan came from. And if a Levite was not a priest, then normally folks from that clan would actually be helpful in the temple. So it's like having a religious professional and then having another kind of religious professional who's maybe not the person in charge, the priest, but actually yet another religious professional, a Levite. When he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side as well. Now, isn't this kind of stunning? He's basically telling a religious professional, listen, these religious professionals, they actually left a man who was beaten and in need. They left him alone. And this is where Jesus is so, one of the things that I think he can so often be mistaken for. People say, yes, he's a great moral teacher, and yes, he's an incredible miracle worker, but he's also an incredibly bright and wise teacher as a carpenter. Notice what he continues in the story. He says, but a Samaritan. A Samaritan. Now, here's the general trajectory of where this story was going. You see, there's a priest, but the priest walks by on the other side. And then there's a Levite who actually reports to the priest, and the Levite actually goes on the other side. Now, the general nature of the story is like, okay, it's not a priest, it's not a Levite. You know what? It's a normal Israelite. Just someone who maybe doesn't belong to the clan of the religious professionals, but someone who's just a regular churchgoer who maybe isn't a priest or a Levite. But Jesus actually throws this subversive kind of description here. It's actually a Samaritan. Now, why is this so unique? Samaritans were seen as unclean and defiled by the Jews. They were seen as half-breeds who were theologically wrong. In other words, Samaritans were seen as the other, the enemy. No, Samaritans don't get this part right. They're not to be associated with. Now, if you know anything about kind of the Gospel of Luke, and we've been exploring this theme throughout the scriptures, especially in the Gospel of Luke, there's this overwhelming, disproportionate heart that God has for the other. Now, what we talked about last week, though, is whether someone is from a Samaritan background or a Jewish background, everyone can miss out on God, and everyone is also the grace of God is available to everyone. And the common theme has been humility in the Gospel of Luke. But here, there's a subversive kind of moment where it's like, oh, here's this curveball again for you. Just if you were wondering what true religion and spirituality looks like, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, I just want you to know, a Samaritan enters the story. And notice what happens. The Samaritan, who were reviled by the Jews, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds. That word for pity is the same word for compassion. And bandaged wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now, notice what's happened here. And again, You don't even have to come from a religious background. You're like, wow, this is what the story is about. The person that no one would expect to be the hero in the story, this Samaritan person, actually has this profound, remarkable, sacrificial display of kindness and sacrifice that belies conventional wisdom. And it's the Samaritan who does this. But notice, the Samaritan does this in this incredibly sacrificial way, but the Samaritan does it within his own limits as well. The Samaritan, it's not like the Samaritan says, hey, let me take this person in, bandage their wounds, and I will nurse them back to health, give them my entire life savings, and that person will live with me forever and ever. Amen. Like, thank God it doesn't say that, right? The Samaritan has lived within the Samaritan's limits, goes to the innkeeper, says, I will pay for this, and goes on with the Samaritan's life. And the Samaritan says, I will respond in the way that I can. It shows that what it means to be a good Samaritan, it doesn't mean that you have to give away your entire life for someone in need. It means that you're awakened to the moments of gracious sacrifice that God might be inviting you to, but you're doing it within your own limits. Remember, love others as you love yourself. Both of those are intertwined. And notice what happens. Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers, Jesus asks. And naturally, look at how the expert in the law replies, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Now, what a revelation. What an incredible, subversive kind of story. He's talking about, you want to know what a fully integrated life looks like? It's not only about loving God and being someone who's well-versed in prayer, the scriptures, kind of like the spiritual practices that often kind of animate religious communities. It's about actually having this be fleshed out in your own life. Now, notice, the question that was asked to Jesus is this question: who is my neighbor? But notice what Jesus does. Jesus doesn't only answer the question, who is my neighbor, but he answers the question, how can I love my neighbor? How can I also be someone who shows love to my neighbor? But in so doing, Jesus is able to illustrate just this profound truth about both. Who is my neighbor, and how can I show love to my neighbor with limits and sacrifice and wisdom. Now, I recognize, and I was just having coffee right before service with someone from our congregation, and we were talking about this very question, especially as it relates to the war that just broke out and the grief that we carry with the prospect of lives being taken and families disturbed and nation states and all the grief and lament that comes with that. And then, of course, that came to this question about like, well, what do we do in a city like ours where it seems like there are people that are on the streets and just walking in a 2-block radius from here, I can walk into people who are on the street. It looks like they've been on hard times. And when we have gotten kind of professional counsel from different folks who work with various homeless populations that encourage us not to give money, but to actually help with a meal or so, but to direct them to different organizations that can. Like, what do I do? Because I can be paralyzed with, there are so many people with disproportionate amounts of need, especially in a city like ours. How in the world do I even live this out? And the question that continues to haunt me and us with all the pain that exists in the world is, listen, I'm just trying to survive. What in the world? Like, what if I don't even have the means, the time, the energy to serve this person who seems to need help? You know, one of the things that we've often said is this one phrase that we've often talked about, and it's the name it's this phrase that it's the founding frame for Jane, who's here, who leads an organization called Do for One, which is an organization that's doing incredible work with those with physical and mental disabilities and creating friendships and family and community in this remarkable way. And the idea is to do this one relationship at a time. It's been this beautiful kind of model. But do for one, that phrase actually comes from this phrase from a pastor in Atlanta, which is do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Listen, each one of us, we may not be able to solve the geopolitical crisis that exists right now. It's above our pay grade. And right now, listen, I'm just trying to just get through just pray that this snow melts. Like that's what my concern is right now. But like various ones of us in our own season of life, like we can't do everything, but we can do for one what we wish we could do for everyone. And so this question then comes up again. Well, who is my neighbor and how do I show love to my neighbor? A few weeks ago, we actually did a seminar called The Art of Neighboring. And it was based on a book from a friend of our church who is part of the movement, one of the movements that we're part of. We're co-affiliated with the Vineyard as well as the Evangelical Covenant Church. And he wrote a book called The Art of Neighboring. And in The Art of Neighboring, he asks this question, who is my neighbor? Now, one of the ways, the very practical exercises that he gave to us, and that's found in this book called The Art of Neighboring, especially around who is my neighbor, is actually through this tic-tac-toe chart. Here it is. Super easy way to look at who is my neighbor. And one of the invitations that he gave to us was, you see, you're there in the middle where that home is. Now, I recognize in New York, very few of us live in homes. Just pretend that's an apartment building or some sort of flat or some sort of 2-3 bedroom that we're kind of stuck in the basement somewhere. No, and basically you see this tic-tac-toe board around, and it's basically 8 boxes. And he invited us, here's what you do. And you see it's A, B, C in each box. And in number A, he actually highly encourages the name of someone where you live. He's talking about your physical neighbor. Now, I changed it up a little bit just because in New York, what I've noticed is that people move so quickly here. And so neighbors that were once there, they leave after a year or two or wherever. And so we actually did this exercise, name of someone where you live, work, or play. And I changed it up to live, work, or play, as in like, just as you think about your normal rhythms, where you go to the gym, where you live, where you work, the people that you see often. For me, it's the local Chick-fil-A. Just revealed, we live very close to a Chick-fil-A. I see Fabian a lot at the Chick-fil-A. Anyhow, but just to write down the name, and then in B and C, you would write down notes about the person, and then C, you'd write down further notes about the person. Like, what are some things about them? What's the name of their family members or their status, kind of relationally with, and where they are, or some little elements of their story. Now, one of the things that we joked about was that this tic-tac-toe board for the people that were, and here we are, all as Christians who profess in following Jesus, and he was inviting us to all write down 8 names. And he said, by the way, whenever I do this exercise, this is known as a tic-tac-toe board of shame. Because most people are like, I don't know who my neighbor is. Like, I see him. And I see her, but I don't know their names, or at least I know their first name. Or maybe I've asked it 3 times, but I keep forgetting. So I just say, what's up, bro? And I just forget. And it's true. It just kind of awakened this sense when we were doing this seminar about like, yeah, it's true. I can often like go about life and my own kind of preoccupations and just forget about people's names and their backgrounds. And so what we said was, hey, let's just whittle this down to one name. One name, and hopefully you can say first and last name, but even if you don't know their last name, what's just one name of someone where you live, work, or play that you see with some sort of regularity, and what are some notes about that person? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to invite you. I'm going to invite you just for a moment. Why don't you think about one name of someone near where you live, work, or play. Now, here's what I'm going to say. The person is not from our church community, okay? So I recognize some of you are like, oh, I was thinking I had 8 from our church community. But like, again, we're thinking about, like, think about how subversive this story is. It's someone who you may not even be in natural relationship with, but at the very least, there's some sort of proximity. So I just want you to think of one name of someone where you live, work, or play who's outside of this church community. Okay? Now, here's what I'd love for you to do. I'd love for you to get into groups of 2 to 3, and you're just going to share just share what the name is of that person next to you that just came to mind for you. Now, if no one came to mind, you can just say, I don't want to talk to you right now. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to say that. You can just say, a name didn't come to mind. Honestly, I'm still thinking about where we're going to brunch today. That's okay too. But I would just love for us, just think about one name and go ahead and break up into groups of 2 to 3 and just share right now, like which name came to mind for you. All right? I'm going to give you a moment. I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning. A real quick exercise, just one name of someone. You could even give some texture. It's my neighbor. It's the person at the local Chick-fil-A, whatever it might be. Just go ahead and have that conversation right now, and then we'll close the service. All right? All right. One more minute. One more minute, everyone. All right, friends. Hey, you can turn to whoever you were sharing with. You can say thank you for sharing, and you can say thank you for listening. Again, just one name. And now, in another course that we have called Missional Discipleship, we actually talk about these 5 different practices that we invite people. If you just think of that one name, and actually comes from this book called Bless by Dave and John Ferguson. And Bless actually talks about 5 practices when it comes to engaging with our neighbor. So remember, there's who is my neighbor, and then how do I love my neighbor? Now, Jesus was speaking metaphorically in this parable of the Good Samaritan. And so these 5 practices are just really practical for us just to be thinking and pondering. And so I'd love to invite you to think about these practices from Bless. So just think about that one name. And here are the 5 practices. Number 1 is to begin with prayer. Start by praying for your neighbors and the people in your life. So here's what we're going to do. Just whoever is in your life right now, the name that you thought of, can you just go ahead and offer a prayer for them right now? Just offer a prayer. Now, here's what I would love for you to do. You are like, we didn't know that it was going to be like this. Whoever you were praying for, if you have their number, could you just text them right now and just say, I know, Wanda, you're like, what is this? I should not have come to church today. Just text them and just say, hey, you came to mind, and I just wanted you to know I'm praying for you. Is there anything I could pray for in particular? All right, so I'll give you a moment Now, I recognize some of you may not even have their contact info. So listen, you don't have to do this, but just think it's going to be funny if everyone's like buzzing Jeff right now. Praying for you, man. You just seem kind of tired, and it seems like you handle everything at Hope Westside. Yeah, just praying for you. Wondering if there's anything I could be praying for. Praying for God's peace and kindness. Lord, we lift up all of these names to experience your grace. Number 2 is to listen. Now, if you find occasion, but just to think about listening to the other's stories, needs, and perspectives. Just being able to listen, not preach to them, tell them about what you believe, but just to listen to their stories. Hey, tell me about the biggest thing impacting your life right now. Number 3 is to eat, to share meals or to spend time together to build genuine conversation. We have an environment called Alpha where we invite folks who may not come from a religious background just over a meal over consecutive weeks. But for you, maybe there's an opportunity for you to eat with the person. Maybe this is someone that you work with that you end up eating with quite a bit. And then number 4, to serve. Look for simple ways to help and bless others in practical ways. So we, during Christmas, we've been getting, I don't even know if this is the best illustration to give everyone. So but now I got to give it. During Christmas, we get a lot of sweets and stuff and I don't eat a lot of sweets. Like our kids, but I just know that when we get a lot of sweets, I'm going to eat a lot of them. And so I'm just like, you know what? So we took an opportunity to take all these sweets. It was a re-gift. I know it's bad. That's what's a bad example. Forget my example. But nonetheless, we started just passing out sweets to, I guess it's a bad example because sweets, I don't know, is it healthy for you? I don't know. Anyhow, just think of ways that you can serve or do some one act of kindness for that one person. We're not overachieving here. We're not going for 8, everyone. We're not in Midtown. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I thought Midtown is more overachieving. Anyhow, and then lastly, story. If there's an opportunity for you to share your own story and the story of Jesus when the time is right. But again, even if that doesn't come, we can always begin with prayer. We can always listen. We can always eat together. Can always serve and re-gift chocolates from Christmas. And I got to stop saying that. Anyhow, and then and share our story. Hey, would you join me? Send everyone. Would love the worship team to come forward.